My name is Ben. I have the honor of serving as the lead pastor here at Downtown Community Church. And today, if you're brand new, then I'm excited for you to be here. But I want you to know that the end of today, the application of today's entire sermon probably isn't for you. And the reason I say this is because the end of today, we are going to all have thoughtfully and prayerfully decided what we can do for the future. So I kind of want to orient you to where we're going at the end of this, is to say that for the first time in the history of our church, we are doing what's called a pledge, which means over the next 10 months from now until January 30th or till December 31st, this is how much we're all deciding to give above and beyond what we normally give. And so I do want to kind of make you aware of that and say, I hope that as we're here today, what becomes clear in all of this is the heart for giving. And the reason I say that is because the last thing I want to do is lead a church where it's just like, okay, we know we ought to, we know we should, we know churches are buildings and people, and the pastor's ego is somewhat tied up with the size of the building and the size of the congregation and the amount of offerings and whatnot that's given. And so what I want to do today is just talk about one particular verse, actually as a launching off point for the rest of the verses that we're going to talk about, because when we read the Bible, sometimes the Bible says stuff, and I don't know if you I don't know if you're honest enough when you read the scriptures to when you read something, you're like, that's ridiculous. Like, I don't think that anybody actually feels that way. And so the one verse that I think is very true of this is where Paul is talking, 2 Corinthians, and he says this. He says, basically, each one of us should give as we have so determined in our heart, not reluctantly or out of obligation. In other words, when we give to God, when we give, our money, basically, when we do that, we shouldn't do it as a reluctant, What we ought to do is when we give generously, or more so, give cheerfully. He says, don't give reluctantly, don't give out of obligation, but I want you to give cheerfully. In other words, the Lord loves a cheerful giver, is how he says that. And sometimes we read that and we're like, what? Like, I don't know anybody who's like, dude, I can't wait to give away my money, right? Like, I'm just like, I woke up this morning and I was like, God, I'm giving my money away today, right? I know I only have so much in my account, and I really don't have that much in my account, to be honest, but like, God, I can't wait to just give what I have away. We kind of do it. There's a sense of obligation around it, and there's a sense for some of us that we know we ought to, for some of us that, we know we maybe should, but we maybe shouldn't, but we don't have that much, so we don't know if we should or if we shouldn't. And I kind of have some student loans, but I kind of have some, scholarship stuff, and I don't really know where and how to parse all that out. Well, I hope to give you clarity in all that today, and why in the world Paul would earnestly say, and God would earnestly expect that we would be cheerful when we give. Here's what I found. Whenever I read something like that, that doesn't make sense to me, whenever I read something like that that's counterintuitive or countercultural or goes against the grain of how I feel, here's what almost always that means. There's something that I don't understand. There's something that I don't understand. And so today I want to speak to the heart of a cheerful giver. Before we say, okay, God, this is what we're going to do over the next 10 months, this is the heart of a cheerful giver. Because for almost every one of us, when we think about the idea of giving, there's a sense of question marks, there's a sense of obligation, there's a sense of hesitancy. And he says specifically, don't do it out of reluctance. Don't do it out of hesitance. On the opposite of that, I want you to have predetermined, I want you to have predecided, I want you to have planned in your heart how much you are going to give. And if already in the sermon, you're like, you've said the word give way too many times, I'm checked out and I'm counting the lights, then I'm glad you're here for this Sunday, because I hope to flip the script on how you think about that in your mind. We're going to go to this story in the Old Testament. There's a guy by the name of King David. King David was one of the greatest kings of the nation of Israel. Israel was basically the God squad in the Old Testament. They were the pre-church kind of group that were the God's people. They were his chosen people. They were his chosen nation. The nation of Israel had started with a guy named Abraham. They had kind of grown into this big family. This big family had been enslaved by Egypt. As they got out of Egyptian slavery, they entered into the promised land, or the desert for a while, promised land. Went in the promised land, and God was their God, and he was kind of going to be the king. And after a while, they said, we want another king. So he says, fine, I'm going to give you a king. And so as he gave them, this king, it was this king Saul. Saul was a terrible king. Well, on the heels of Saul came a king named David. David, you've probably heard about because David and Goliath. David and a lot of David and Bathsheba, maybe if you're there for that Sunday. But David was the greatest king. But to this point, what was interesting is there was no house of God. God was a God who basically would go and he would dwell in a tent. They had a tent that was the physical manifestation of the presence of God on planet Earth. And so it would go, it's kind of like the God of the tents. It was kind of a tabernacle of sorts. This is actually what's interesting about John chapter 1, if you ever read the Gospel of John, when he says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. What he actually says is the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. In other words, he's saying, you remember your Old Testament roots, talking to a Jewish audience, how God would move around with the people. God was in the people and with the people, and God would go with the folks. And David looked around, and David saw that every other god from every other place had an incredible temple. I mean, ornate, large, decorative, beautiful. And so David decided for himself, I am going to build a temple for God. I am going to build a temple. And this is going to be the most incredible temple. This is going to be a temple that puts all other temples to shame, because we know our God is the one true God. And so I am going to build a temple. Well, unfortunately, God said, no, you are not going to build this temple. David, you have blood on your hands because he was basically a warrior king, but your son Solomon is going to build a temple. Well, so David felt a sense of obligation and responsibility, and I think he was compelled to say, okay, well, if I can't build it, then I'm going to fund it. If I can't build it, I'm going to make sure when Solomon takes over, he's going to be young when he takes over, but I'm going to make sure when Solomon takes over that he has everything that he needs to actualize the potential and further the kingdom of God and the nation of Israel. Basically, David said this: this may not be for me, but this is for the future. This may not be for me, but this is for the future. This is for the people who will come after me. This is for the people who will follow in my footsteps. This was some of the thought of the Genesis as we're thinking, man, how do we capture what it is that we are trying to do, what we're trying to communicate? And it's basically that as we expand into the back 9,000 square feet, so much of that is for the future. It's for the future of the kids on the south side. It's for the future of the kids' ministries and the families' ministries, both of which have been exploding recently. This is for the future of the college students who shows up to church, who kind of has left the nest, left their family, don't really, kind of trying to figure out their faith on their own, and they show up to a church, and every time parents come here, they say, man, I can't believe young people decide to go to church on their own. And I say, I know, me too. I sure didn't when I was in college. But you do. And so this, you might be graduating and kind of on the back half, and this might not be for you, but this is for the future you. This is for the future of the kids, of the south side, of the college student who will come and who will be a part of our church. And so David, seeing this, knew that this was a future thing for the nation of Israel. This was for Solomon. And so David decides that he is going to take up an offering. And in his offering for the temple, he first pledges what he is going to give, and then he talks about what the entire nation's going to give, and then gives us a window into the perspective of a cheerful giver, which I think is going to be somewhat of a shift for many of us. So this is what David says as he starts off Chronicles chapter 29, 1 Chronicles, which I know everybody, you were having your quiet time in 1 Chronicles this morning, so this is going to be repeat. And David, the king, said to all the assembly, so he's got the nation of Israel, kind of as many people as possible, he's got an assembly gathered together, and this is what he says: Solomon, my son, whom alone God has chosen, is young and inexperienced, and the work is great. In other words, Solomon won't be able to do this on his own. Solomon is young, Solomon is inexperienced, and I love him to death. He's my son, but the work is great, and he is young and inexperienced. Which some of you would say, well, don't look down on those who are young, but, set an example in life, love, space, peace, purity, all that's cool. But he's young and inexperienced at the same time, okay? So he says, and the work is great, For the palace will not be for man, but for the Lord God. In other words, we're doing this for God. This is God's deal. This is God's thing. He says in verse 2, so I have provided for the house of my God so far as I was able, the gold for the things of gold, the silver for the things of silver, and the bronze for the thing of bronze, and the irons for the things of iron, and the wood for the things of wood, besides great quantities of onyx and stones for setting. He says, for setting antimony colored stones and all sorts of precious stones in marble. And then he begins to say, moreover, in addition to all that, in other words, this is what David would say, we have collected a lot. And we have been intentional about collecting a lot. And in our intention of collecting a lot, I'm going above and beyond what we've already collected. Here's what you also need to know, by the way. As we launch into this building campaign, we have been intentional about collecting along the way. Our church runs on a budget. Sometimes I try to put kind of staff in kind of payroll metrics into our stuff, and it tries to run this kind of algorithm of your church size compared to your church budget. Whenever I do that, it basically says, we're going to kick out your budget because that's ridiculous. Like most churches your size have double to triple the budget that you have, but we have been able to do it in a way that streamlines, is efficient, utilizes so many volunteers, our neighbor team. And in doing that, we have basically been able to collect approximately, I'm going to say give or take, $100,000 that we're already going to be able to put towards this building campaign. And so as he says, hey, there's a lot. There is a lot that we have already collected. There's a lot that we've already provided. And so this is what we have collected. And David said, but above and beyond that, let me tell you, I have no obligation as king to do this. But above and beyond that, because my heart is in this, and this is, by the way, great leadership on David's part, because David doesn't make anybody else say, but David says, above and beyond what we have given, what we have collected, this is what I am personally doing and giving. He says, moreover, verse 3, in addition to all that I have provided for the holy house, I have a treasure of my own, gold and silver. And because of my devotion to the house of my God, in other words, because I am devoted to this thing that God is doing, because I want people to see God through what's happening, I give it to the house of my God, 3,000 talents of gold, of the gold of Ophir, and 7,000 talents of refined silver for overlaying the walls of the house, and for all the work to be done by craftsmen, gold for the things of gold, and silver for the things of silver. Who then will offer willingly, consecrating himself today to the Lord? So he says, okay, so nation, this is what I'm giving. Who's in? Who's in? It's like Jerry Maguire. Have you ever seen that movie? I know that's an old reference for some of you. You're like, who? Right? This is like where this guy, he's a sports agent, and he's like leaving his agent. He's like, all I want to know is who's coming with me? And I think he's expecting everybody to be like, me. And everybody's like. But David stands up and he says, so this is what we've done. This is what we're given, and this is why. This is what we've done. This is what we're given. This is why. This is what I'm given. And then he says, so who else is on board to do the same? Well, the entire nation was. Verse 6, then the leaders of the Father's house made their freewill offering, as did also the leaders of the tribes and the commanders of thousands and 100,000s and the officers of the king's work. They gave for the service of the house of God 5,000 talents, 10,000 derricks of gold, 10,000 talents of silver, 18,000 talents of bronze, and 100,000 talents of iron. So they gave a massive amount. And whoever had precious stones gave them to the treasury of the house of the Lord in the care of Jehiel Gershonite. Then the Lord rejoiced because they had given willingly. They said, God, we are honored to give this to you. We willingly give this to you, not begrudgingly. For with a whole heart they had offered freely to the Lord, and David the king also rejoiced greatly. And so in his rejoicing, you can't miss this, because this is kind of the function of what happened, right? David says, this is what we're going to do, this is where we're going to go, this is what we're going to build. This is what we've collected so far, this is what I'm donating to it, this is what all the nation donated to it as well. They rejoiced, God was joyous, and David stops and says, let me give you a snapshot of the heart of what's happening internally. Therefore David blessed the Lord in the presence of all the assembly. And David said, he says, "Blessed are you, O Lord, the God of Israel, our Father forever and ever." Verse 11. "Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. For all that is in the heavens and in the earth is yours." He says, God, let me just stop and say this. God, we're going to give some stuff, but I can't help but stop and acknowledge, say, God, yours is the power, yours is the glory, yours is the majesty, and yours is the victory. And God, I just want to pause and say this. We're giving some stuff to you, but everything is yours, God. Everything is yours. You have the power and the authority to give and to take away. God, everything is yours. He continues and he says this. "Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all." Now, I think David had a very unique ability to say this. Because if you know the trajectory of David's life, David was not born as a king. He was not born in a kingly way or a priestly way or of any type of significance. David was born in a little town, and when a prophet came to his hometown, to his house specifically, because the current king had done some kind of, messed up stuff, he comes and he says, okay, God's calling me, he's leading me in this direction. I'm here to appoint the next king. Goes to David's father, Jesse. He says, Jesse, one of your sons is going to be king. Bring out your sons. Jesse says, okay, brings out his sons. He says, nope, 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 nope. You got any more? To which Jesse would be like, well, this is awkward. Because I do. I have one more. But let me tell you about David. David, he's a shepherd. Which, we kind of glorify because the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Jesus is the good shepherd. Shepherds were weird, okay? I want you, some of you know people who are homeschool, right? Some of you are homeschool. We love you. Right, but there's something about, the social interaction that's positive and, social and normal, I want you to imagine David, who has been hanging out with sheep all day, every day, a lot of nights, just me and the sheep. Bye. Like he's starting to talk bye after a little bit, It's a little bit awkward, it's a little bit weird, and he's like, man, let me tell you about David. He just hangs out with sheep. In fact, he smells like a sheep. In fact, he thinks he actually speaks sheep. It's really odd with David. And so he says, no, I want you to bring me David. Well, David, he sees and he says, yep, that's the guy. That's the king. And David's like, yo, sheep to the palace. That's what I'm talking about, But it doesn't happen that trajectory. He just says that, and then basically David goes back out to the sheep, and eventually he gets put in kind of the king's court because he could play, some stuff really well, and because at one point he went out and he fought this big giant named Goliath. But it was pretty funny because in the sheep, David had wrestled sheep away from a bear, wrestled a sheep away from a lion, and basically David looks at Goliath and says, hey, I've killed a sheep, and I've killed a lion and a bear. Like, who's this Philistine? I'm taking him out. Like, he's a giant, but he ain't a lion. And he kills Goliath with a stone, just whop. David, through a crazy trajectory of life, becomes king. And I think David had the unique ability to stand and say, yo, there is no way I should be right here. There is no way that I should be right here. And so David, on the precipice of the end of his life, as he knows Solomon is about to become king, says, God, I know more than probably anybody else in the nation that all of this comes from you, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here. You know what's interesting? Some of us, we have a level of success that's so normalized that we think it's because of us that we're successful. We don't have the awareness to say, man, there's no reason I shouldn't have been, born in a mud hut in the middle of a war-torn South Sudan. Like, we're just like, yeah, I was, went to school, I worked hard. Well, yeah, of course. But you know how many people on planet Earth do that? If you ever own a car, by the way, you're in the top, 5%, or I think 10% of people on planet Earth in terms of just wealth and wage earning. Just a car. Some of you are like, man, I was ticked when I didn't get a car when I was 16. Some of you, wasn't even a question. For me, it wasn't. So David says, all of this is from God. You have the power Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. In your hand are power and might. In your hand it is to make great and to give strength to all. And now we thank you, our God, and praise your glorious name. And I love verse 14. If I could just say, here's the nutshell of the entire heart of the entire sermon. It's verse 14. He says this. He says, but who am I and what is my people that we should be able thus to offer willingly? He says, God, who am I? Who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give to you? Because God, it's not that we have to give to you. It's that, man, we are beside ourselves that we get to give to you, God. We're beside ourselves at the fact that we get to worship you, that we get to give to you. We talk about this sometimes in the church world, or at least in our church. It's the difference between have to and get to. Most of us were raised with the thought that like God needs us and so we have to. Oh, God must need me to serve, so I guess I have to serve. It's like, no. We get to serve. We should be willing to work anywhere, everywhere, pump gas all night just for the opportunity to serve God, to say, oh man, I can't wait to hold the door for people as they are entering, to enter into the presence of God through worship. I can't wait to be an usher to help people find seats. I can't wait to help people park cars because I know that I want people's heart to be ready and prepared. I want them to see our level of preparedness, which creates this sense that they are prepared for God to show up. And in fact, God already lives inside of us. It's that I get to, not that I have to. And so David looks at this and says, man, who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give to God? Because the truth be told is we shouldn't even be able to. The disparity between God's holiness and God's love and our sinfulness. So we should say, we're not even allowed to give to you. And he continues. For all things come from you. Everything we have, God, comes from you. And of your own have we given you. In other words, God, I know it seems like I'm giving, but I'm only giving back what you have already given to me. God, all this is yours anyways. He says, for we are strangers before you and sojourners, and all our fathers were. Our days on the earth are like a shadow, and there is no abiding. O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a house for your holy name comes from your hand and is all your own. Let me tell you the two things that will shift us from obligatory, reactionary givers to cheerful, honoring, planned givers. First and foremost is the realization that we get to, not have to. Second, it's the realization that I'm a manager, not an owner. I'm a manager, not an owner. David says, hey, God, this is all yours. It's all going back to you. You have given me the ability to manage it for a little while. And so when you say, hey, I want you to give some more towards this thing, you say, yeah, of course it's yours. Of course it's yours. This is open hands for me, God. It's a cheerful. It's not out of reluctance and obligation. It's like, yeah, of course. This is, by the way, if you ever have a lot, and some of you have a lot, and you're just like, you're killing the game, that's phenomenal. Oftentimes it's like, so feel bad. If you own it, you should feel bad. But if you are a manager of it, you should feel responsible. Right? Some of you, you have financial managers. In fact, I don't know if he's here. So my financial people actually just started to go to the church, and it's Proper Wealth Management. I meet with Nick Chasen, right? And so Nick and David, and they kind of went on their own thing, and they're doing their own thing, and it's phenomenal, right? But every year, Nick and I sit down, and we talk about where we are and, what's going on and how the savings are and where stuff and money is and where it's allocated, where it needs to be allocated, what we need to adjust, help to kind of navigate the succession plan of the company. And let me just tell you, if at any point I said, Nick, so where's the money? And he sat down and he said, man, I don't know. I don't know where I spent it. I'd say, well, you're fired, right? How many of us, God has entrusted us with a lot and we have no clue where it goes? We just have no clue. And if I ever said, Nick, man, I love you, but I've got this really great opportunity that I really want to take some of my money and put it towards that. And Nick just said, yeah, that's good for you, but man, it's all gone. I'd say, what? Right? Now, he would never feel a sense of, I feel bad that I have been entrusted with this. He would feel a sense of, I am responsible for this, and I am simply a manager, accountable to the one with whom I'm entrusted the management of. I am simply responsible. And so I want you to know this, the reason, I can't communicate this strongly enough, the reason that we give cheerfully is because we do not own, we do manage, and we are honored that we are allowed the opportunity to manage, and we willfully give back to our Father who allows us to manage. Because, by the way, our Father gave everything for us in Jesus, and on top of that, he entrusts us as people in the United States of America who have more net than almost anybody else on planet Earth. And he has entrusted, and we are responsible. So David says, so this is what I'm given. This is how much I'm given. He says, I know, my God, that you test the heart and have pleasure in uprightness. In the uprightness of my heart, I have freely offered all these things, and now I have seen your people who are present here, offering freely and joyously to you. O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Israel, our fathers, keep forever such purposes and thoughts in your heart of your people, and direct their hearts towards you. Grant to Solomon, my son, a whole heart, that he may keep your commandments and your testimonies, your statutes, performing all, and that he may build the palace for which I have made provision. So see, it's God's, but through God I have made this provision. It's God's, God owns it, but I have freely given to God of what God has given to me. And so I want you to know that we are for the future. I want you to know that we freely give to God and are honored to do so because of how much God has given us. So in a few minutes, we're going to sing a song, and I'm going to give you opportunity, if you haven't already, to fill out this card. You can fill out that part or not, but this just kind of gives you a worksheet to help work off. Some of you've already done this week. And it tells you, and it gives you a little thing down here that says, here's your kind of pledge your amount, weekly, monthly, one time. Now, at the end of the service, we're going to have people in the back with baskets. You're going to drop one off and put it there. You're going to tear this off. See, this is a little perforated edge. You see that? It's effluence right there. Just kidding. You're going to be able to tear that off, put it in the basket, keep this part. They're going to give you a magnet where you can just kind of stick this top thing to your refrigerator. And so we want you to take this, fill it out, and we want you to know, 1, don't do it out of obligation. 2, don't do it reluctantly. But if God has so captured your heart that what you say is, God, I freely and willingly give to you, and this is what I give to you. Now, before you do that, I want to tell you one more thing. And I tell you this with sincerity and humility, but knowing that I uniquely have an obligation, or at least I feel like I do, to say that I'm not going to ask anybody to do more than what I am willing to do. And most of you know that we give to the church currently almost approximately what the church gives me. The church, pays me a little bit, and they really just kind of, it's kind of a medium story that no one really cares about, but there's mileage and stuff in the IRS and whatever. Anyway, all that to say is this. I want to tell you how much I'm given, because I don't want anybody else to think that there is a weirdness or a sideways or that I am not all in on this, and more so because I just want you to know, as your pastor, I am not doing anything that I wouldn't ask you to do. In fact, my wife and I, who we had a conversation about this, and this was a, hey, what do you think about this? And whenever you kind of have those conversations, it's like, hey, I love you. What do you think? You're like, I hope that it's positive, but we'll see. Both thought about it, prayed about it, and she said, absolutely. Annually from the church, I make about $17,000 total. That's with taxes on top of that. I don't know if anybody's ever been that transparent, but I really don't care. I make about net taxes $15,000 during the year. That because it's a housing allowance, they pay me the tax on top because I'll be liable for it at the end of the year. So for the rest of the year, I am pastoring the church for free. For the end of the year, I'm basically saying, funnel that money back into it. So from Lindsay and I, know that we are all in for the rest of the year. I am going from lead pastor to lead volunteer pastor. And so our pledge is to give $15,000. And let me tell you why. It's not because I have to. Because the truth is what you might also not know is someone like me who has an org chart title like mine, who has a church the size of ours, on a regular basis makes on average about $115,000. So there's already $100,000 I give up every year. It's not because I have to. It's because I love you. It's because I love our church. It's because I love what God is doing in and through all of you. And I am so grateful that God is the one who gives all the power and all the authority. And for Lindsay and I, it's an honor to say we will gladly go without because God has richly provided for us. And so I don't have like the cool list that David had, so here's all the doorknobs I'm going to be able to buy, and here's all the windows that I'm going to donate. I just want you to know, for the rest of the year, pastoring the church for free for a total of about $15,000 that we're giving to the building campaign. And I don't want anybody else to disclose what they're giving or what they're doing. I just want you to know, in case there's anybody here and you're kind of skeptical of church and money's always weird, and you're thinking, okay, but what's your bottom line? I want you to know that we are not only going without, but we're going to continue to give how much we give anyway. So the church, I'm telling you, they're making a deal on me. Just want you to know that. The reason I say that is because we get to. We don't have to. We get to. We don't have to. We are simply managers, and God has entrusted us with so much. We joyfully and willfully say, God, this is what we give to you. I don't know what your above and beyond is. If you haven't thought about it, think about it. If you have thought about it, great, you probably already got it and it's written down. If you want to take it home and think about it for a little while, that's fine. We're going to have some places where you can drop it off for the next several Sundays. Know that we have a magnet for you so that you can just put it on there because we want it to be a constant reminder. And when you give, by the way, for the first time, you're going to get one of these shirts because we want you to know that we love you, we trust you, and we thank you. And so we want to give you a gift for your generosity, for saying you are for the future. The mission and vision of loving God, making disciples, being great neighbors is for this generation and for the next. So we are for the future. Let's pray. God, as we take this next song, and for those of us who have already thought about it, we think about it. For those of us who prayed about it, we would willfully, joyfully, lovingly give to you everything that you have given to us. God, we are honored. Who are we? And who is Downtown Community Church that we would be able to give to you, a God, as willingly as we are, as freely as we are? God, you loved us. God, you sent your son to die for us. You didn't simply give a little bit. You didn't simply give 10%. You gave 100% on the cross. God, in bodily form, died for us. And so we freely, willfully give back to you. God, we say, for the future, for this next generation, would you help us to continue to remain faithful to the calling of your calling, loving God, making disciples, being great neighbors to anybody and everybody around us. So God, I pray that there's rejoicing, that we freely and willfully give. I thank you for a wife who goes along with my ridiculous ideas to say, let's just give it all away. And I thank you for a church who says the exact same thing. God, all we have is yours. This is simply a reflection of the posture of our heart. We get to. We don't have to. And we are managers, not owners. Because everything comes from you. This offering is simply a response to everything that you've given to us. And it's in your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.